Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going to do something a little different. We're going to take a single year, 1874, and treat it like a fulcrum.
A fulcrum. I like that.
Yeah, that specific point on a lever where the weight just shifts and everything suddenly moves.
That's a great analogy, because if you look at the source material we're covering today, Section 6 of the text, 1874, is exactly that. It's the moment a movement stops being, well, a local American thing and pivots into what the text calls a worldwide vision.
And we are going to be hyper-focused today. We're not doing a broad sweep. We're zooming in on a very tight, very intense 4-year window, 1874 to 1878.
Right. And just to be clear for you listening, this isn't going to be a dry recitation of dates. The whole mission of this deep dive is to get into the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
How does a church, which is still pretty young, probably underfunded and based in the American Midwest, suddenly cross the Atlantic
And plant flags in 9 different European nations in just 48 months.
Yeah, how does that happen?
And they didn't have Zoom calls or anything like that.
No, they did it with steamships, trunks, and a lot of grit.
The cast of characters we're going to meet is honestly kind of wild. We've got a grieving widower taking his teenagers to Europe, a rogue priest, a man with a severe speech impediment who somehow gets the message into Russia.
It's a very human story.
It really is.
But before we get to the who, we have to set up the why. Why 1874? I mean, why did they wait until then?
That was my first question. The text mentions that before 74, the organization, the General Conference, was in a phase of internal consolidation.
Exactly. Think of it like a startup company. In the early years, you're just trying to keep the lights on, right? You're defining your product, or in this case, your theology. You're sorting out your internal structure. The leadership in Battle Creek, Michigan, was focused on just getting the American church on solid ground. They weren't really looking at a map of Europe.
But Europe was looking at them.
That's the twist. While the leaders were busy with all this internal stuff, the mail just started piling up. The source material calls these letters Macedonian calls.
Let's unpack that term because it sounds really specific.
Oh, it is. It's a biblical reference.
Yeah.
The Apostle Paul has a vision of a man from Macedonia who's begging him, come over and help us. So in this context, in the 1870s, Macedonia was Switzerland.
Ah, okay.
The leadership was getting these urgent requests from Switzerland saying, basically, we believe what you believe. Please send someone to teach us.
But how? How did a group of people in the Swiss Alps in the 1870s even know about a specific American church movement? There's no internet, no global broadcast.
And that brings us to one of the most fascinating characters in this whole section, M.B. Tchaikovsky.
M.B. Tchaikovsky. The text describes him as a converted Catholic priest.
Yes. A former priest who had converted to these Advent teachings, the Second Coming, the Seventh-day Sabbath. He was incredibly passionate. He actually went to the church leadership in America and asked them to send him to Europe.
And they said no.
They said no. We don't know the exact reason. Maybe they didn't trust him. Maybe they just didn't have the budget, but they turned him down.
But Tchaikovsky wasn't the kind of guy to just take no for an answer.
Clearly not. The source says, very diplomatically, that he went to Europe under another sponsorship.
Which is a polite way of saying he got another church to pay for his boat ticket, but when he got there, he just preached the Advent message anyway.
Precisely. He was what we'd probably call a rogue agent today. He traveled all through Switzerland, Italy, Hungary, just planting these seeds. He was setting up groups of believers, but, and this is the key thing, he never told them about the headquarters in America.
Wow. So these Macedonian calls that started showing up in 1874, they weren't random at all.
Not at all. These were the fruits of Tchaikovsky's unofficial work. Eventually, these groups found out there was an organized body in America that believed what they did, and they started writing these letters. Come help us. Organize us.
So the leadership refused to send a missionary. He goes anyway, creates a demand, and that demand forces the leadership to finally act.
It really shows that tension between, corporate strategy and just individual passion. The official organization was lagging behind the reality on the ground. By 1874, they just couldn't ignore it anymore.
So the pressure hits a breaking point. It's 1874, the General Conference meets, and they make the big decision, we're going to Europe. And the man they choose is J.N. Andrews.
John Nevins Andrews. And if you look at the intellectual history of this movement, he is a giant, a real scholar, a former president of the General Conference. Wasn't sending a rookie.
No, it was like sending the CEO.
Exactly.
But the source material gives us this little window into his personal life right at that moment, and it's heartbreaking.
It really is. The text points out that in 1874, Andrews is a widower. His wife, Angeline, had died just 2 years before in 1872.
And he didn't go alone. This is the detail that really got me. He took his children.
Yes. His son Charles, who was 17, and his daughter Mary, who was just 13.
I just have to pause on that. As a parent, the idea of packing up a 13-year-old and a 17-year-old 2 years after their mom has died and getting on a boat to a place where you don't even speak the language, that is a staggering level of sacrifice.
It completely redefines the image of a missionary. It wasn't some young single person with nothing to lose. This was a broken family, uprooting everything. And the source implies the kids were part of the mission too.
So they get to Switzerland. Andrews is the official guy. He steps off the boat. And then what? What does he actually do?
He starts organizing. Andrews was a very systematic thinker. He found these scattered groups that Czechowski had left behind and started bringing them into a cohesive structure. He organized the European mission.
And he didn't just stay in Switzerland, did he?
No. The text says that by 1875, just a year later, he traveled to Prussia.
Prussia, which is basically modern-day Germany.
Right. And this is where that earlier rogue work really paid off. The source says he found a specific group of 46 Sabbath keepers already there.
46 people. That's not a small Bible study. That's a whole congregation.
Exactly. Imagine his reaction. He travels all that way into Prussian territory, and he finds almost 50 people already keeping the Sabbath, just waiting for him. It proved the whole thing wasn't just some American fantasy. The ground in Europe was already prepared.
Okay, but here's the logistical problem. You have Andrews in Switzerland. You've got a group in Prussia. There's interest in Italy. He might be brilliant. The text says he could read 7 languages and recite the New Testament from memory, but he's still just one man. He can't be everywhere.
And that's the classic bottleneck, isn't it? Physical presence is limited. So this is where the strategy pivots from just visitation to media.
Publishing work.
Exactly. You have to remember, this is the late 19th century. Today, if you want to scale a message, you use the internet. In 1874, the internet was the printing press. The printed page was the only technology that could mass-produce ideas.
So they set up a headquarters.
They did, in Basel, Switzerland. That became the hub for Central Europe. And the key milestone the source points to is 1876. That's when they launched Le Signe Temps.
The French language version of their magazine, Signs of the Times.
Correct. And just think about how strategic that is. A missionary like Andrews can speak to 50 people in a church. But a magazine,
It can go anywhere.
it can be printed in the thousands, it can be mailed, it can cross borders where a person might be stopped. It's a force multiplier. When they invested in that printing press, they were saying, we're here to stay.
So we have the hub in Switzerland. The press is running. Now let's look at the map, because the expansion between 74 and 78 is, well, it's dizzying. It's not a slow creep. It's an explosion.
It branches out in every direction. Let's go north first. The text introduces us to a man named John Matteson.
Matteson, this is 1877.
Right, Matteson goes into Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and the growth there is described as incredibly rapid. The source notes that by 1879, just 2 years after he gets there, they were already opening a publishing house.
2 years.
Yeah.
From zero to building a factory.
Breakneck speed. It suggests that, just like in Switzerland, the cultural soil in Scandinavia was just ready. He wasn't fighting the culture. He was answering a question they were already asking.
So Matteson's in the north. Meanwhile, you've got a pair of brothers, the Bordeaux's, who seem to be covering everywhere else.
DT and AC Bordeaux. Yes, they were French-speaking Americans, which was a huge advantage. The text says DT Bordeaux focused on France itself, but his brother, AC Bordeaux, his itinerary is exhausting just to read.
What's the list?
The source lists Italy, Germany, France, Switzerland, and Romania.
Romania, that's way out east.
It is. And remember, no high-speed rail. The physical toll of that has to be immense. AC Bordeaux is moving between Italy and Romania, navigating totally different languages, cultures, legal systems. It's incredible.
It just highlights how thin the line was. We're talking about maybe a half dozen key people covering a continent of hundreds of millions.
It's a classic startup dynamic. A few highly motivated people wearing multiple hats and just running on fumes and conviction.
Speaking of which, we've talked about the all-stars. Andrews the scholar, the Bordeaux's, the linguists. But then the source material throws us this curveball that I absolutely love.
You're talking about Philipp Reiswig.
Yes, Philipp Reiswig. If Andrews is the corporate CEO, Reiswig is. He's the total opposite.
The text is very blunt about it. It calls him uneducated. And even more telling, it says he suffered from a speech impediment.
Which for a preacher, you'd think that's a career ender,
Hmm.
if your whole job is to communicate and you struggle to speak.
Right. In a normal hiring process, Reiswig never gets the job. He wasn't sent by the board like Andrews was. But the source credits him with opening up one of the most difficult territories on the map, Russia.
How? How does a man who can barely speak well convince people in Russia, a place often hostile to outside religions, to even listen?
It seems his weakness was actually his strength. The source implies his simplicity and his persistence were disarming. He wasn't trying to win debates with fancy rhetoric.
There's a certain authenticity that comes from someone who struggles to speak but speaks anyway.
Exactly. It tells the listener this must be really important to him or he wouldn't be trying this hard. It just cuts through all the skepticism.
So Andrews won people with logic, and Reiswig won them with vulnerability.
And the text makes a point of showing that the worldwide vision needed both. You needed the structure of an Andrews to build the institutions, but you needed the raw, unconventional courage of a Reiswig to break into the hard places.
It's the Wild West phase of the mission, isn't it?
It is, and we can't forget the other major power player in Europe, Great Britain.
The source takes us to 1878 for this, the entry into England. Now you'd think, well, they speak English, that should be the easiest one, right?
You would think so, no language barrier, but culturally England was tough, very traditional. It wasn't as open to new American religious ideas.
So who was the pioneer there?
A man named William Ings. He arrived in May of 1878.
And the stats are, well, they're interesting. The text says that in 16 weeks, so 4 months, he had 10 people keeping the Sabbath.
Now compare that to the 46 people waiting in Prussia. 10 people in 4 months sounds slow.
It sounds like a real struggle.
It was a struggle. It was slow, hard work. But looking back, those 10 people were the seed of something massive. The source traces a direct line from them to major institutions that exist today.
Right. It lists the Stanborough Press and Newbold College.
Exactly. Institutions that have impacted thousands of lives. They all trace their DNA back to those first 10 people William Ings found. It's a good reminder that slow doesn't mean failing.
And eventually, they brought in the heavy hitters for England, too.
They did. Later that same year, 1878, Elder J.N. Loughborough arrived. He was another veteran, like Andrews. His arrival was a signal that they were committed to breaking through in Britain.
So let's zoom out. We start in 1874. The church is basically just American. By the end of 1878, just 4 years later, where are we?
We have established work in Switzerland, Prussia, France, Italy, Romania, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Russia, and Great Britain.
That is just explosive.
It's exponential. And the most important takeaway isn't just the list of countries, it's the structural change. The text notes that these new countries didn't just stay missions, they became bases.
They started sending their own people out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is the worldwide vision in action. Switzerland starts sending workers to France. Germany eventually sends workers to Russia. The movement stops being a hub-and-spoke model coming from the U.S. and becomes a decentralized global network.
It transformed from just an exporter of missionaries to a creator of mission bases.
That's the only way a global movement can survive. If everything has to go back to Michigan for approval, it just dies.
I keep coming back to the people, though. We can analyze the strategy, the printing presses, but none of it happens if J.N. Andrews doesn't get on that boat, or if Reiswig stays home because he's embarrassed about his speech.
It's the human element. We see these old black and white photos of people in stuffy suits, but these were radicals. They were risk takers. Andrews knew he might never see America again, and he didn't. He died and was buried in Switzerland.
And his children?
Charles and Mary grew up in the mission field. They became part of the work. They sacrificed their entire American adolescence for this cause.
It really brings the so what of this whole deep dive into sharp focus. We're looking at a text about church history, yes, but the lesson feels bigger. It's about conviction overcoming limitation.
I think that's the core of it. You just look at the list of disqualifiers in this story. Grief, single parenthood, speech impediments, lack of education, language barriers. Any one of those is a perfectly good excuse to stay home.
I can't go to Russia, I can't speak properly, or I can't go to Switzerland, I'm grieving my wife.
Totally valid excuses, but they didn't use them, and because they didn't, the map changed.
It kind of challenges our modern fragility, doesn't it? We have translation apps, video calls, we can fly to London in 7 hours. But do we have that same drive to communicate?
That's a great question. Technology makes connection easier, but it doesn't necessarily make it deeper. They had to rely on the depth of their message because the medium was so hard. We have an easy medium, so sometimes the message gets shallow.
That's a thought that is definitely going to stick with me. We have the bandwidth, but do we have the signal?
Well put.
So as we wrap up this look at 1874 to 1878, I want to leave you, the listener, with that image of Philipp Reiswig. I think he's my MVP of this section.
He's a strong contender, for sure.
Imagine him standing in a small room in Russia, struggling to get the words out. Maybe people are confused, maybe some are even laughing. But he keeps going because he believes he has something they absolutely need to hear. And eventually, they listen.
And a movement is born.
It just makes you wonder, what imperfection in your own life are you treating as a stop sign when it might actually be your greatest asset? Is it possible that your struggle is the very thing that makes your story authentic?
Authenticity usually wins over perfection. That's the lesson of 1874.
Something to mull over. Thanks for helping us unpack this pivotal point in history.
Always a pleasure to explore the archives with you.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next deep dive.